Hi, Coach. Jen Hadfield with the Nine Basketball. Just, with all the newness with your team this year, how has it been over the past 10 games or so, just as your team kind of gets more used to playing together and to your system?
Yeah, absolutely. Nice to meet you, Jen. So, firstly, really happy with where we're at despite the last two games against Chicago. I think, especially that first month, how quickly we picked up the principles of play that I envisioned for this team. Was so encouraged by that, and I think we just got to get back to the things that we were emphasizing more of earlier on in that first stretch of 10. I think, especially in this last stretch in the kind of doubleheader against Chicago, I felt like just a lot of it was our pick and roll basics in terms of cover execution, on ball pressure, and when I look at that first month, we were first in turning teams over, and then we also held opponents to the lowest field goal percentage in the league. So we know we can do it. It's just a case of how we can be more consistent with that and make sure we're going back to all the habits that we emphasized during training camp. So really believe in the group. We had a really productive kind of conversation after the second Chicago game, and really excited to see what we can do tonight.
Christy Winter Scott. Oh, hello. Christy Winter Scott, Monumental Sports Network here in DC. Coach, you have a lot of balance on your team in terms of your offense. When you're looking at players who have really blossomed within your offense, what do you think that you could attribute that to? Excuse me.
Yeah, absolutely. Love the question. And I think offensively, I am happy with where we're at. And even looking at that last Chicago game, despite the fact we got 94 points, despite how much we need to improve our defense, was an encouraging sign. But I think a lot of it really starts with the spacing. We've tried to be really immaculate with how we're spacing, where we're spacing, and we call them shapes, the shapes that we're creating on the floor. And I think that really helps in terms of being able to unlock and get the most out of our players. Well, we need optimal spacing to do that. We have to basically always prevent one defender from being able to guard two. And I think just how we're spacing in our shapes, how we're using the dunker in a lot of our pick and rolls, it's really helping with that. And then I think the second thing, which we're still getting there, I think it improves every game, is just this awareness and recognition of the covers that we're playing against. So, the idea is every pick and roll we see, however teams guard it, we want to be very intentional with one or two things we're doing to beat that cover, and we want to do it so well that it forces teams to play a different cover or change their defense entirely. So I think we're getting there. It's a very basic offense, really, but for me, it's all about how can you execute those basics to an exceptional level. And I think the more we go on, the better our cover solutions get, then the more advanced we'd be in terms of, perhaps adding more tweaks and more misdirections to get in the final shape. But I think right now it's more, how can we get to one pick and roll out of perfect spacing and make the defense wrong? And once we can see really, really good intentions with that, then we'll get more advanced. So yeah, I'm happy where the offense is at, and I think many players have stepped up and developed a lot on that end of the floor.
And lastly, for me, on the defensive side, what kinds of challenges does the paint presence pose from the Washington Mystics, and how do you look to disrupt that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's similar to Chicago. That's almost been our kryptonite a little bit this year in terms of when we play against those really dominant bigs, fours, fives, etc. So in that first Chicago game, we saw it with how we were defending the post, and I think that's important to carry over to tonight. We did a really good job there, and I think when we have done executed more disruptive schemes on post ups, we've been good this year. So that's going to be important. I think it's more our pick and roll defense. I think Washington, similar to us, they run a lot of empty side pick and rolls. So we've got to make sure that we're really executing our base defense with that. I think that was what hurt us more in that second Chicago game. And we tried essentially using three different pick and roll covers in both those games. And I think the problem was I don't like adjusting to another cover if you're not doing your base cover well. And I think, if you're doing your base cover well and teams are beating you, then, credit to them, we're going to have to try something else. But I felt like we never focused on the first cover, our base cover, and really performing that to a high level. So that's what we're going to challenge our group with tonight and get back to that. Yeah.
Coach, hey, Juliana Morgan with Monumental Sports
Nice
Network.
to meet you.
You as well. So, in practice, you recently told the media that you've been working on your transition in defense. So, against this Mystics team that's going to be pushing the paint and really pushing the pace of this game, what was your, not necessarily schematically, but your message to your team regarding this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think transition defense is a really interesting one. I mean, we're seventh right now in offensive rebounding, and I think that's where, to me, I think the analytics is really clear on this in terms of you have to be as aggressive as possible crashing. And I think, you know, we don't naturally have great rebounders offensively and defensively, but I'm really encouraged that we're seventh and we've been fifth, like last stretch of 7 games. I think, you know, it's developing those habits now will help us in the future. So I think the challenge is by crashing aggressively, what we saw the first Chicago game and what teams are starting to do is leak out a little bit more. So, you know, on the rise of the shot, because we're trying to shoot a lot of threes, teams will start bolting, winning their first 3 steps, and that's when we're not crashing. We got to have that recognition of, instead of being on the front foot and being aggressive like we normally would, that's when we got to recognize the leak out and go back. And JC Sheldon, she got like 8 points alone. She was really good at it with those lag-free reactions. So that's something we've got to carry over into tonight in terms of, you know, if we see that happening, the crash is off, we're back, we're containing our matchup. And then really the other piece to the transition defense is it's the spill, we call it spill transition. It's the emergency transition when the other team have a 5-on-4. And I think a lot of that is when we're missing at the rim, we're getting to the rim a lot, which is really encouraging. But when you miss or you fall on the floor, what that does is you automatically create a 4 against 5. And those are the situations we've got to be better at in terms of how we're protecting the paint, finding hot shooters in transition, etc. So we got a good kind of stretch of practices coming up. I think transition defense is going to be something we hit even more.
Coach Dorian Kraft, Monumental Sports Network. 2 quick follow-ups on things that you've said. You said you had a good conversation following the second Chicago loss. I know Portland's not a new franchise, but this new reiteration of what the Fire is. As you're trying to build the culture, who's been the loudest player voice in the locker room for you?
Yeah, so BC's done a really good job stepping up into that role. And that's kind of, I think that's our next level in terms of, I think we have a really nice group. And now it's like, how can we have our players actually hold each other accountable to those high standards which we have of each other in a positive way? And I think that's when, you know, that's the strength of a culture to me, when, you know, as opposed to coming from the coaches. And I think sometimes it does have to be that, but it's more, how can the players have the framework and the tools to respectfully challenge each other? And SA brought up a great point in our team meeting. She was like, you know, in that first quarter, I gave up 3 blow-bys. I need one of you to tell me that's not good enough, that's not acceptable. And I think that's the thing. We've got such a nice group of players. Everyone gets on with each other so well. We do have a good culture. But if we want to have a great culture, a culture is not always a rosy environment where it's really happy every day. And you have to have some difficult conversations, and you have to challenge each other. And sometimes, come over here, you're not doing your job, let's make it better. And I think that's what I'm really challenging our group to get to, because I think that's going to help us a lot.
You noted the change in the field goal percentage defense and the ability to turn your opponents over from May until now. I know those things don't happen in a vacuum, but is there something that you can point to that's led to the dip in those numbers?
Yeah, absolutely. So I checked this morning, and we've slipped from 1st to 4th. So I think it's great that we're still 4th, but I think for me the formula for, if you're a young team, the formula is turning teams over and winning the possession game, winning the possession battle. So I would like to see if we can finish top 3 in the season. I think some of that has been credit to all the great coaches in this league. I think we came in with a lot of full court pressure, and that caught a lot of people by surprise because you don't see it in this league. And that really helped in that first stretch of games. And now teams have found ways to scheme and be prepared for it, obviously with scouts and things of that nature. So now it's a case of how we've seen that development. Now, how can we kind of morph and tweak our tactics for how teams are preparing for that to get back to more of our hits, our disruption in the full court? So we do have some ideas there. I think seeing a little bit more of Sarah as our backup 5 will help with that. I think she's done a really good job initiating some of those, but I think it's more of a timing of, all right, we know teams are expecting it early, so how can we do it at more surprising moments of the game instead of always going off an inbounds pass, doubling off that one? There are other kind of opportunities to do it. So I think that's the first one. And I also think the second one is our pick and roll. You know, the reason why I elected to go with more of an aggressive pick and roll cover is to force turnovers and not be conservative and just play in a drop. And, you know, you don't really force turnovers with that type of defense, especially with our personnel. So I think if we can execute our pick and roll covers better, we will also see some more turnovers being forced.
And sorry, I have one more if we still have
Absolutely,
time.
Go for it.
Well, Emily obviously spent the last 2 years here returning today. You know, what made her a good fit for you guys, for your system, and then how have you seen her continue to grow in the role that you expected her to play?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say the one kind of label I'd use is versatility in terms of we've seen it defensively in terms of the blocks, the steals, and then offensively, I think a great fit for how we're playing in terms of how can we space five and be really intentional with, you know, multiple players being a catch and shoot threat all over the floor. And then I think something she's really grasped this last stretch of 5 games is the grab and goes. So when she rebounds, initiating the break, we do want to play a little bit faster. We don't always have to rely on the outlet to the one. And I think Em's done a great job kind of leading our team in those grab and goes, breakout dribble, put pressure on the opponent's rim in 3 seconds. So, yeah, I'm obviously really encouraged by the things we've seen from Em, and I think the system's a really good fit for her.